we're going to look at the impact of mass migration, and one of the main arguments used in order to justify mass migration quite a lot of the time is UK birth rate statistics, which essentially has the argument that we're not replacing the people we already have in this country, and in order to sustain the economic growth model, we now have to continually have growth, and the only way to do this is to import millions of people into the economy. Even though GDP per capita head per person is falling, the government likes the general GDP number to be increasing, and for their economic growth model to continue to be successful, and that's in inverted commas, we need to have a huge demographic transition, even if it's not a sustainable solution in any real terms. Now, UK birth statistics here have got the UK birth rate hovering around 1.4 to 1.5, which is well below the 2.1 replacement rate needed to sustain a population in general. So you can take any group of people, a population, and the men and women all go off and have children, and what you need is 2.1 children across the whole of the population in statistical terms, and then what will happen, you'll be to replace the population, and that 0.1 there is meant to cover various things like deaths of children, etc. And so if you do have a 2.1 replacement rate needed to sustain the population, then all's well and good and your population will remain at a certain level. However, if there's less than that, then what happens? There's going to be a decrease. Now, this isn't just a UK problem, this is a Western civilizational problem. One of the only places that the birth rate is increasing is in Africa. So in places like, for instance, Nigeria, there's twice the birth rate that they used to have, whereas in westernized countries, then what we're finding is that it's dropping off dramatically. And as I said, this isn't a UK problem. What we're looking at is all the way across Europe, also Japan, China as well. There's a massive birth rate issue to go on with China, particularly because they used to have a one-child policy, and there's lots of places where this is happening around the world, and governments generally do panic about this. And the reason governments panic is because fewer young people means a shrinking workforce, higher taxes, degrading public services, and because we have top-heavy economies where people are getting older and staying healthier for longer, then what can happen is that you have a collapse in the economy due to this overload of people living longer. And we all want to live longer, I can understand that. The governments, though, don't necessarily want you to live longer in that respect. You know, they would far prefer if we died earlier. I'm sure they wouldn't come out and say that, and I'm sure that's not their intention anyway, but we're just looking here at birth rates. So in birth rate terms, it's better for the government if people die earlier. Now, there are a few things contributing generally to why experts believe that the birth rate is declining. So the first thing is the cost of living crisis. Now, I don't particularly buy this argument too much. I think if you want to have a kid, you have a kid. If you want to have a family, you have a family. And I really don't think that once you've had one child, I don't think the cost for raising two adds that much more to the burden. Obviously, there's an additional cost there relating to clothing and food and all of that. But once you're the engine's running and you've already started to have children, adding more on the top doesn't really put that much extra strain on things. More to that, I believe that there's been a cultural shift. So back in the day, and I'm talking about, the 40s, 50s, 60s, you had this standard situation, which was woman at home, had kids, plenty of time to look after home and have children, man at work. This is the general nuclear family option. And because of that, people tended to have as many children as they wanted. But of course, then the feminist movement did come along, particularly in the 60s. There was that kind of second wave of feminism, if you like, before the beautiful third wave of feminism that we experience today. But the second wave of feminism essentially said that women should be having their own place in society. They want to go to work and they want to do what they want to do, and they should be able to have a life that they want. And that's fair enough. You want a career-focused lifestyle, fine. You want, to have your own career. You want to do everything you want to do, fine. But what this does is this affects birth rates. And in addition to that, because the economies don't get any better, what you'll find nowadays is that both parents generally have to go to work. And so you can fit a child in using grandparents as babysitters during the day, or if you can afford childcare, whatever it is. But because of that cultural shift, there's a massive change. And so it is harder to have children. So people that would normally have 2 or 3 children, they might have one child and say, oh, this has been really difficult to get through, we're sure want another one right now, let's put that off for a few years and then add a few more years, and you say, you know what, we'll just stick with the 1 or 2 that we've had. And of course, governments don't have any real solutions to this. And so, what governments will do, they'll use mass migration as a way to solve this particular problem. You can approach it from a tax-friendly policy like they tried in places like Hungary with pro-family policies where you get tax breaks, etc. But it doesn't really fill the gap enough, because what you're arguing or what you're attempting to do is face off against nature. And so if people are naturally falling into a pattern of life, it doesn't really matter about tax policies. People are going to do what they're going to do. So is the solution to bring in millions of people into your country? Well, I would argue no, because what that does is that strains housing, schools, the NHS, and all of these services are already in crisis. And also we've got social tensions, social cohesion issues, multicultural problems. And regardless of that, it's a massive short-term fix, because if we just replace the workforce with migrants, then where do we stop? Do we stop at 80 million? 100 million? Because don't forget, once a migrant comes into the country and they become part of our economy and part of British life, then they too get old. And so, they just don't stop in the middle of their life. They will continue to get old just like the rest of us. And of course, those people have to be looked after, and so on and so forth. And so, what's my solution? The only sustainable solution relating to declining birth rates is to allow it to happen. If you were to provide that choice to most people and say, would you prefer mass migration to fix the declining birth rate problem, or would you be prepared to accept a declining public services over the short term till an equilibrium could be found? Because an equilibrium would happen within a generation. So what would happen? The birth rates come down, but at some point it'll stop. It can't keep going down below 1. It'll find its own rhythm at around 1.2, 1.3. That's what experts believe. So what we're really talking about here is a generational shift around the world where, as a society, we have to accept that for whatever reason, birth rates have come down. That's just how it is. And let's all just accept it. There'll be less people around, and would that be such a bad thing? To not have people everywhere all the time, to not feel the need to be constantly building houses, to have a bit of space, a bit of greenery, a bit more of a community of people where there's less people in there, and that leads to higher quality relationships. For me, governments want mass migration, people don't. And when push comes to shove, what I personally believe is, because nature is wanting to find a new equilibrium relating to birth rates, I think we should just accept that our birth rates have come down. We don't have to worry about mass migration. We don't have to worry about replacing people. What will happen over a period of time, the amount of services that we would need would reduce, as would the need to provide money to the exchequer with which to pay for the services. Would it be painful in the short term? Probably. Would it lead to a massive decline in things like the NHS and healthcare? Yes. Would it mean that we wouldn't have as many people to fulfill everything we needed in society, and would some of our society crumble? Yes. But what would happen within a generation or so, within 20 years, 30 years? Guess what? People would start having babies again, because the economy and everything would start looking up. We are not on a sustainable model at the moment. This is not sustainable. What do we stop at? 80 million people? 100 million? 200 million in the UK? Do we just keep building houses and houses till eventually all of the towns and cities just merge together? Do we build cities over the Lake District or over all of our farmland and just import our food from everywhere else on the globe? Is that what we do? This model that we're using now is not sustainable. It's not sustainable in terms of sheer population numbers, and it's not sustainable in terms of culture. And that, my friends, is what allows me to completely reject the argument of, in order to help sustain our economy and our culture, we need mass migration to counteract low birth rates and low fertility. That's an argument that I'm rejecting on a philosophical level, on a scientific level, and a cultural level. I'm not buying that argument. I'd be quite happy to suffer a decline in services, and I'm guessing so would you as well. Anyway, hope you found that interesting. Thanks for your time.